Okay, should be coming through on the audio for everyone now. We were muted there a second ago. We might have someone in the chat beyond you. I mean, I assume you're in the chat.
See.
Okay. All right, we're here for roundtable, or no, I mean book club.
I was going to say, wait, are we doing a book club?
I just realized I screwed up on the slideshow again. I forgot to take I have the slide created for our book club thing, but I forgot to change the title card. So the title card says roundtable. So
Magnus is here.
Oh, awesome. I'm trying to figure out how. I think I found this last time. I think there's a way for me to skip slides without. Maybe not. All right, well, we will go ahead and skip through it here. Yeah, round table number 15. Yeah, so I did put this one together for our title card, but forgot to take off the original title because I was going to change it to saying book club. That's why. All right, so we'll go ahead and hit the intro real quick and then get started into the intro and get talking about shuffling.
Yeah.
All right, we will hit the intro real quick. Hold on.
The Dark Tower by Stephen King. The man in black fled across the desert, and the gunslinger followed.
Go then. There are other worlds than these.
Death, but not for you, gunslinger. It's time we had our own palaver, I think, and it's going to take a while.
And yet, dauntless, the slug horn to my lips I set, and blew. Child Roland, to the Dark Tower, came.
We are quartet, one from many. The palaver begin.
Hello and welcome to Dark Tower Palaver. This is our podcast covering Stephen King's Magnum Opus, The Dark Tower series. My name is Tad.
And I'm Peter.
And we're here for book club. Almost said roundtable again. Book club number 9, I think, for Drawing of the Three.
Yep.
So, yeah, we're chugging right along. Feels like we've now surpassed what we did for the first book, and we're not even that far through this book when it really comes down to it. I think...
that far.
I think we're about 40% as far as the Kindle thing says.
That's where I stopped, so we're before that.
Yeah, whether we get that far in the conversation, I stopped and it was literally at the 50% mark on Audible.
Oh, really?
Or on
Kindle?
Kindle, yeah. I don't know why I always get those mixed up. It's all the same company, so not that it matters. So
it's the same beast.
Yeah. So first thing I want to do is warn you. We don't really warn you about spoilers on these episodes because we don't go any further than we are. But I guess we could warn you about spoilers if you're like in the middle of the first book, say. You might spoil stuff up to the point that we're at. So, yeah. But in general, these are our episodes that are safe for people that have not finished the series. You won't have to worry about us just diverting and talking about things like the end of the story or, maybe characters' ends or, big moments. Like this is just one where we talk about where we're at in the journey and no further, but we do talk about stuff in the past. So, yeah, you can feel safe here if you're, say, in the middle of book 5. Next up, if you guys want to find our podcast, you can stream us on Stitcher. You can find us on iTunes, being one of the big providers for podcasts. But you can also find us on any podcast service. There's a number of them out there, especially if you're not an Apple user. Also, you could subscribe, rate, and review us on any number of services. iTunes is definitely one of the big ones. If you are using that service, if you could do that, that'd be awesome. You can also find our show notes and other random assorted things at darktowerpalaver.com. Now, for these episodes, we usually don't have show notes because we're basically drawn straight from the book, so there's not really a whole lot. But if we're in our round tables, all of our articles and stuff we talk about will be on there. So on a normal episode, check out our show notes over there. Or if you're listening to old episodes and like catching up, definitely check that out when you're listening to round table episodes.
Yeah.
Also, if you guys want to be part of the book club episodes or round tables, you can do that in a number of ways. Peter can tell you about that.
Best way to reach us is through email. It's darktowerpalaver@gmail.com. You can also follow us on social media. We're on Facebook and Twitter. Facebook is facebook.com/darktowerpalaver. And then on the Twitter, it's @darktowerpod. That's @darktowerpod. We stream our live shows on YouTube for the roundtables. That's youtube.com/darktowerpalaver. We do also stream our book clubs, but they can't stay posted because the sound clips will copyright take us down.
Yeah, indeed.
So if you want to check out our shows that we've put up on YouTube, you can there. It's youtube.com/darktowerpalaver. And then subscribe and ring the bell so you get notifications whenever we go live, because we're just simply terrible at telling you guys when we're going to record.
Yeah. Well, your schedule's been kind of moving around a tiny bit.
It's been crazy the last few weeks. I got a little bit of a promotion, so I had training, and then I had a weekend off, and then it's just been all kinds of crazy. But the good news is that in September, I'm finally going to where I don't work 2 different shifts throughout the week. So I will have a set schedule. We'll be able to set it every week. Will be a lot easier to set, and that's still in development. So I'll let you guys know a little bit closer into September what that schedule is going to be. I think did we talk about it last time on the roundtable?
I can't remember.
Well, maybe we should talk about it now, just in case.
We've talked. I know we've talked about it, but I can't remember if we were recording or whether it was just talking.
I think we may have been after the show, so I'm going to talk about it now because we're on the book club, and I want the book club fans, if there is any that don't listen to the roundtable yet, to know that in the middle of September, right now I'm working 2 different shifts between week and weekend. So in September, they're changing it to where I work 1 shift all 5 days that I work. That includes the weekends. So we'll be able to record right around what we did last time.
Yeah, which is a little bit earlier. So like right now we're looking at, it's about 6:30 our time.
Yeah.
So that's like what, 8:30 Eastern time.
Yep.
So we'd be what, 3 or so hours earlier than that.
Yeah, about 3 hours. Basically we'd be starting the show about 3:30 every Saturday that we record, which is usually the day that we pick.
Which is about 5:30 Eastern time.
Yep, 5:30 Eastern time. So it makes it a little bit easier. A little bit earlier in the day for people to be able to listen before they go out and, go clubbing, because,
Don't ever do that.
It's just another soundbite for you. I mean, I've already embarrassed myself with the email jingle and all the other stuff that I've done on this show. I mean, I might as well just add on.
That's true.
So
just want to make sure you don't get too far into dad territory there.
I'm always there. Always there.
Yeah, it's not a good thing. Not a good thing. Okay, yeah, so let's jump on in. So last time we ended pretty much right. We ended is it a whole section that we were in, I guess? Because this next one is the show. Well, I don't know. The way it's structured, it looks like it's a whole new section, but it could just be because you don't really have chapter numbers in this one. This one's kind of just a helter-skelter thing in general.
There's chapter numbers in the book, so.
For Shuffle?
For Shuffle, it is, let me get there.
Because that's what I'm talking, yeah. Lady, I know what we're getting into after Shuffle, I know we definitely have chapter numbers, but the Shuffle thing, yeah,
it's like book 2, basically.
Yeah, it's like the next section, but it doesn't have the traditional stuff, and I think that's probably a stylistic choice.
Yeah.
Due to, obviously, what we're about to get into. This is a very unique thing that we've seen in the entire of what we've read so far, for sure.
Absolutely.
So yeah, this is kind of an odd one, but it's kind of a fun one too. I feel like there's some things that King tends to write that'll be a little bit more unique, and this is definitely one that fits right into that. Also, there's like different ones we've talked about on roundtables before with different books where he does some kind of things every once in a while. They're kind of cool. So yeah, this one is definitely like that, called Shuffle.
Yep.
And this takes place right after Eddie and Roland have closed the door to Eddie's door, and they're now both facing their respective issue physically. and I guess like mentally to a point. Roland is fighting his infection, and Eddie is fighting withdrawal. So I think that's kind of the structuring for why this is such an oddball thing, because we're kind of phasing in and out of them in terms of what's going on. And it's an interesting way for King to do that, allows like you to kind of jump around time a little bit. Like who knows how much time we're about to cover, but it's very ambiguous, and I think that's kind of cool too. So, what do you got here?
I mean, very first paragraph.
All right.
So, it starts off with, it just, like Tad said already, that it doesn't start off with, chapter, name, number, nothing like that. It just says shuffle. And I noticed, I don't know if you noticed this, but all the shuffles are lowercase.
Yeah.
So it's not even like they're proper or anything like that. This is the time following that night was broken time for Roland. Time that didn't really exist as time at all. What he remembered was only a series of images, moments, conversations without context, images flashing past like one-eyed jacks and trays and nines and the bloody black bitch queen of spiders in a card-shaped rapid shuffle. Later on, he asked Eddie how long that time lasted, but Eddie didn't know either. Time had been destroyed for both of them. There is no time in hell, and each of them was in his own private hell. Roland the hell of the fever and infection, Eddie the hell of withdrawal.
Yeah, so I mean, I guess I kind of just I feel like they were teasing us towards that with the end of the last chapter, that we're definitely going to be looking at something like this.
Yeah.
So this is definitely spelling it out. It's I love the calling some of the name for the cards.
Yeah,
again, it's some of that universe building stuff that if you went through and listened to these book clubs, you will obviously tell that it's something that I've always been a fan of. We've seen some before with different things, but now we're seeing it with like playing cards, which is a fairly universal thing, I think, generally speaking. Yeah,
there's one later in the chapter too with the like the universe building and stuff like that. So
so always a fun thing.
Yeah.
And then a little bit further down here, it says a week's worth of pills was all I had to give you. After that, you're going to have to do the one thing or the other on your own. And then Roland responds, "Get well or die." And Eddie says, "Right." I like that. Just kind of like I don't know. That feels like a roll of the dice to me.
Yeah.
Like one of those where it's just like, well, this is what we got. So if I need more, it's who, like, I don't know, like what can you do really, right? You got what you got, and that's what you got to do. I feel like in a way it's kind of where we're sitting also with the bullets and the gun. Like these bullets are either are or are not going to work.
Yep.
There's no reason fretting about it. It's just the nature of it. You just gotta,
it's one way or the other.
Yeah.
Yep.
And we went into that gunfight the last episode or the last two episodes for for book clubs, and we kind of had that a little bit. So we're having the same thing here. Gives him all the pills he has, and let's see what happens. So and then it's funny because now this is where you kind of get into the structuring of this. Is now kind of like right here. You don't really see the end of this scene. It just says shuffle again, and it kind of cuts into there's a gunshot as twilight draws down to dark. So I guess that's kind of the structuring to expect here now is like you're not getting complete scenes. I guess I don't know if scenes is the right phrase for a book, but if you're looking at like a movie, you have complete scenes. This one's obviously being written in a way that those scenes you're kind of chopping scenes out, not getting them all the way.
It's even more evident when you get to the next shuffle. Like for me, it's turning the page. It says Roland weekly grieves. Wait, is it Roland? I think. Oh, the gunslinger thinks. Weekly and gropes for revolvers that aren't there. Oh no, it's the end. But there's no more. As something starts to smell, shuffle. Like just like that's it. It cuts it off. And then if you notice, I don't know if it's that way in the Kindle version, but it says shuffle, and then the next sentence says, "Good in the dark." Something after, so it's like it just breaks it,
brings you in mid sentence.
It's not proper. It's not capitalized.
You know what it reminds me of is I'm trying to think of one of them. I think the Andolini death did that to us, where you were jumping back and forth between chapters, and sometimes you're only getting a sentence or less for each chapter, each subchapter, because you're jumping from like Eddie to Roland to Andolini and then back. And because I remember it's the Andolini one, because it's like it comes back and goes like one of the subchapters. All it says is like it was no misfire. And then it goes to the next subchapter. So all you get is that one little, and like I feel like that even though it's kind of jumping really quickly, it's structured still. This is not. This is just like like if you broke a bone, it's not a clean break. You've got shards, and you've got you're going out in mid sentence, shuffling, coming in mid sentence to a completely different like time period and different sentence. So it's definitely a unique structuring for sure.
Because even like the one you're talking about with Andolini, it was going from Eddie to Roland to Andolini on the beach. So it was the three involved in the scene. It's going right there, staying right there. It's not jumping time or anything like that. It's just jumping that, if you put that scene on a time scale, so it's 1 second to a minute, it would be like 1 second to 15 seconds was Andolini. Then 15 seconds to 20 seconds was Roland, and then and so on and so forth. But this one, it's having like, this is the scale of from 1 second to 1 minute, a break, 3 hours later, next scene kind of thing. So
yeah, I'm really trying to think. There's how I picture this in my head is there's movies that do it. Generally speaking, it's when someone's wounded. I just watched one recently, and I can't think of what the hell it is. And like you'll get the thing where like you'll hear. I know what it was from now that I'm thinking of. If anyone watches Better Call Saul, the new episode, there was it's a medical thing where someone has like an issue, and like so what they did is they cut this like. I don't want to call it a montage, but they cut in and out of like they're basically interpreting the dude's coming in and out of consciousness, and he's coming. Honestly, it plays just like this chapter.
Yeah,
like suddenly, like you're hearing one thing, and then it fades out, and it comes in another, and the screen is like flashing like different pictures, and they're different. And honestly, that's what I've always pictured with this. Is like if this was a movie, I'd picture it being like one of those really weird cut edited things, but that it's like constantly like flashing in and out of like a bright white screen, and then back into like just. In a way to be really disorienting, I guess, because I'm kind of a movie guy, so that's how I tend to interpret books, is how would it look on screen. And I think it's a common thing, not just Better Call Saul. That's one that we've all seen.
Yeah, I was going to say, I know what you're talking about. There's a scene where someone is slipping in and out of consciousness, and it's from their perspective. So you get like the eyelids closing and opening, and people have moved. It's a different time of day. And I can't remember which one it is, but someone's like stung by an animal, like kind of like Roland, where they're poisoned or something, and someone comes up and says, "Hey, save your strength." Back out again. Wake up. Here, take the pills. Back out again, kind of thing. It's very similar to Roland's.
If you even want to go old school, MASH has an episode that's 100% first person from a patient.
Oh yeah.
And you start the episode, and he's like in the battlefield, and him and his platoon are there, and they get bombed. And then throughout that episode, there's times that the screen goes black, like he's blinking. And then when he comes to, it's like a completely different time. There's somebody in front of him in the OR, or the post-op and stuff. So I mean that's really old school. I don't know how many people necessarily are MASH fans, but I certainly am. And I
think that's what I was thinking of as MASH. I was thinking like the medical treatment is what I was thinking.
Yeah,
of.
that was really flashy, and then there's just times when he's in the post-op that like they said, like they close the shutter to where it looks like an eye closing. Then a few seconds later opens, and it's like suddenly one character's in front of him talking to him or reading his chart or whatever, and it's an interesting, definitely probably groundbreaking for the time, but it's an older show, but that's very similar to what I'm kind of picturing here.
Yeah, exactly.
So, it is kind of cool. What did you think of this when you first read it?
Like, the first time,
can you remember? I mean,
it was a little disorienting at first, trying to understand what King was doing. And then I realized that it was, we're seeing it all from Roland's perspective. Like we were talking about with the Andolini and Eddie and Roland thing. We weren't jumping to where then it was Eddie was doing this, and it wasn't where we were third person behind Eddie. Everything here is Roland.
Yeah.
So that's where it took me a little bit before I got it. And then when I finally got it, it was just like, oh, this is brilliant. I love this.
Yeah. Totally. Yeah, I don't really remember. I remember being really like disoriented by it. Like it's disorienting, especially because like we hadn't seen anything like this before. And honestly, I don't know that I had read anything like this before. I could be wrong, but I don't think so. It's just a structural thing that a lot of narrative people probably wouldn't do. So, then what do you have in this shuffle here that kind of comes in mid-sentence? You got anything?
Not in the second paragraph down right here after this next shuffle. He says, it says, Eddie, he tries to say, but his voice is all gone. His throat hurts so bad. We should have brought some Aston too, he thinks, and then he tries to laugh. All the drugs for him, none for Eddie. Eddie appears. He's got a tin plate. One of the gunslingers would know anywhere it came from, after all, from his own purse. On it are steaming chunks of whitish pink meat. What he tries to ask, and nothing comes out but a squeaky little farting sound. Eddie reads the shape on his lips. I don't know, he says. All I know is it didn't kill me. Eat it, damn you. He sees Eddie is very pale. Eddie is shaking, and he smells something coming from Eddie that is either shit or death, and he knows Eddie's in a bad way. He reaches out a groping hand, wanting to give comfort. Eddie strikes it away. So, yeah, just kind of gets you a sense that Eddie is in a bad spot, too.
Yeah, and I had that highlighted as well. And I remember kind of just one of my thoughts with this is that during the course of this, and we're going to get through it, so I'm talking a tiny bit ahead of what we are here, but all within what we're going to do in this episode. Yeah. But like we're going to go through and we're going to see kind of Roland going through this, and we're not at all going to address Eddie.
No,
and what he's going through during all this.
Like it's notated. Like Roland takes a note, like right here.
Yeah, like here. But it's like, you get glimpses of it,
yeah.
but we're not going to have like a chapter of Eddie going through heroin withdrawal.
Right.
I mentioned that in the last episode about heroin is an ugly bitch when it comes to drugs.
Yeah,
like you like, I think like I said, I believe from everything I've been told, and I hope I'm not speaking out of turn, but like I've always been told that like heroin's one people can't just get off of. Like they always have to have something that kind of corrects their body.
Yep.
Like it's one that even like junkies a lot of times say like don't fuck with heroin. So it's like one of these that like this would have been a very, very trying time for Eddie, and we're really not going to get anything for it. We're just going to see small glimpses from Roland's perspective, and it's an interesting way to write from King's perspective because you have two characters that are going through something, and like I don't know, do you think the chapter would have been like tolerable if it was more coherent and you actually did go through these two guys going through their thing, or is it almost better this way to kind of to hedge it away from the audience? Because ultimately you can kind of pile on an audience, right? Movies can do it, books can do it. You can get to a spot where suddenly the person that's reading or watching doesn't enjoy it anymore because it's just too much.
Yeah.
Do you think this could have been that way?
I think it would have been a little bit. It's just like nothing but misery for both main characters. It's like instead just give me one that's slipping in and out of consciousness. Give me the worst one, maybe.
Yeah,
it's like you were saying with heroin, like. Who is worse off here? This was actually a question I was going to bring up, and you've already talked about the heroin withdrawal, so we've already seen Roland here and everything like that. And actually, if I could just go forward just a little bit, if you're okay.
Oh yeah,
with that.
yeah, absolutely.
It's like right here, after the next shuffle, he manages 3 pieces, and everything blurs into a new shuffle. Effort to speak, but all he can do is whisper. The cup of Eddie's ear is pressed to his lip, except every now and then it shudders away as Eddie goes through one of his spasms. He says it again. North. Up the beach. How do you know? Just know, that he whispers. Eddie looks at him. You're crazy, he says. The gunslinger smiles and tries to black out, but Eddie slaps him. Slaps him hard. Roland Blue's eyes fly open, and for a moment they are so alive and electric, Eddie looks uneasy. Then his lips draw back in a smile that is mostly snarl. You can drone. Yeah, you can drone off, he said. But first you got to take your dope. It's time. Son says it all anyway, I guess. I was never no Boy Scout, so I don't know for sure, but I guess it's close enough for government work. Open wide, Roland. Open wide for Dr. Eddie, you kidnapping fuck. So we see that not only is Eddie going through heroin withdrawals, we see that Roland is not even able to stay conscious long enough to take a pill.
Yeah.
Eddie has to slap him. So we see that both of these guys are in a bad way.
Yeah.
Like, this is one of those, like, survival movie type scenes where it's just like, Jesus, is everybody going to die?
Yeah, it's definitely probably the worst that we've had them in so far, situation-wise. And I even think back a few lines ago, or the last few thing we mentioned when we talked about smelling Eddie, either shit or death. And it's one of those things that, like, we're going to find out here in the next little bit. I can't remember if I highlighted it, but Eddie mentions something about, shitting yourself, and we'll get there.
Yeah.
But, so if you take that's a little bit ahead of where we're at now, and apply it to there, then that means that wasn't shit that Roland is smelling. He is literally smelling death on Eddie. I don't know if because I know I'll forget if we just skip ahead, wait till we get to that line.
Yeah.
But we will get to it and talk about the larger context of that. But like,
I do have it highlighted. I know what you're talking about. I do have it highlighted. And
I do too. I just didn't know if I would remember this point of it because, for Roland to smell, a pungent odor, like, I think like as a reader you might just go, oh, Eddie probably shit himself, part of his withdrawals. But then later on we're going to find out that no, in fact he did not. So that what Roland is smelling is literally like the death or whatever it might be.
And I actually forgot about this little line down here that actually is Roland's beckoning, reaches for him. Eddie tries to draw away. The gunslinger's bull shooter eyes command him. I don't know why, but I always like that, bull shooter eyes.
Yeah.
And then Roland draws him close, so close he can smell the stink of Eddie's sickness, and Eddie can smell the stink of his. The combination sickens and compels them both. Only two choices here, Roland whispers. Don't know how it is in your world, but only two choices here. Stand and maybe live, or die on your knees with your head down and the stink of your own armpits in your nose. Nothing, he hacks out a cough, nothing to me. Who are you? Eddie screams at him. Your destiny, Eddie, the gunslinger whispers. Why don't you just eat shit and die, Eddie says. Eddie asks him. The gunslinger tries to speak, but before he can, he floats off as the cards. And I always like that. As floats off as the cards.
Yeah.
And I think
shuffle is obviously.
Yeah, and then shuffle is right after that. And I also, one thing that just kind of popped into my head, I honestly didn't notice this the first. I read through a couple times this part because I really do like this part with Eddie, and you get a lot of background with Eddie later on. Like you were kind of no, you didn't bring that up. You were talking about stuff, but later on we get a big section that's Eddie's backstory and everything like that, and his relationship with Henry. And I always like this, so I read through it twice. I read through it the other day, and then I read through it again today and added more notes. But I never realized, man, the cards, dude, that may be a reference to Balazar.
Could be
with his
or flag.
Or both.
He had the cards with the tarot reading, right?
Well, think about it.
Cards have been something that's been a narrative so far in the story, for sure.
Well, I mean, one of the old school drafts, I mean, that could be doors or that could be cards right there on the cover of the book.
Yeah.
So,
and that's what I'm saying. It draws back to that tarot reading at the end of book 1. But also, you're right. Yeah, Balazar has had kind of had an asphyxiation with cards as well.
Which is kind of interesting because if you look at that, Balazar's was Eddie's guy who he had to go see.
Yeah.
And the Man in Black was...
For a reckoning.
Yeah, the Man in Black was...
Yeah.
Roland's guy that he had to go see.
Yeah. They both came to that reckoning, you know, whatever it was. I think Roland was obviously given a pretty huge injection of larger knowledge, maybe beyond what he could comprehend. And Eddie came to probably what is most troubling to him is his brother's death, right? That being probably the main thing that he came to when it came to Balazar. I think also that was like one of those things that kind of put him in a spot where he was not only faced with his brother's death, but before that, it's like kind of putting, because I feel like partially like they kind of talk about like the junkie shuffle and stuff like that. I feel like the gravitas that Eddie has in that scene earlier is something that's new to him. So it's a way for him to kind of conquer his past in a way, and then his brother. Obviously. So there's like two-fold things that kind of come together for him when it comes to that. Whereas like in Roland, it's the same thing. Like he gets like, we get our big look as an audience into more of what the tower is. Maybe Roland learns a little bit more about it. And also everything that he had been doing for God knows how long in the desert chasing him came down to ultimately catching him, right? And he finally catches him and, is basically started further along on his journey. So kind of interesting how they both kind of come to a head.
And they both involve cards.
Facing down, yeah, and they both end up, coming down with cards, whether it's a tower of cards or...
Fate?
Yeah, definitely. And then after that shuffle, this one's really short. It's just a kablam. So we probably another gunshot. Roland opens his eyes on a billion stars wheeling through the blackness and then closes them again. He doesn't know what's going on, but he thinks that everything's okay. The deck's still moving. The cards still shuffle. So a really short one there, but I feel like you're kind of seeing maybe a pattern because we already heard one gunshot, and now we're hearing another. So we're kind of seeing a little bit as it progresses. So, and then next he starts talking about the meat again, eating the meat that Eddie is bringing him. Do you have any other notes in this section? This is a little bit of a longer one.
Yeah, right here. There's a big part here where so I have this first, like, for me, it's the bottom of the page right here. This whole section kind of marked for my notes. Basically, it's Roland's eating more of the meat, and Eddie makes a point. He feels better. Eddie looks better too, but he also looks worried. So Eddie's got this little bit of worry going on, and Roland kind of, like inquires what's going on. And Eddie says that they're getting closer. He says, they may be ugly, but they ain't completely stupid. They know what I've been doing. Somehow they know, and they don't dig it. Every night they get a little closer. It might be smart to move on when daybreak comes if you can. Or it might be the last daybreak we ever see. What? That's not exactly a whisper, but a husk somewhere between a whisper and real speech. Them, Eddie says, and gestures towards the beach. Data Chak, Dumma Chum, and all that shit. I think they're like us, Roland. All for eating, but not too big on getting eaten. Suddenly, in an utter blast of horror, Roland realizes the whitish pink chunks of meat Eddie has been feeding him have been. He cannot speak. Revulsion robs him of what little voice he has managed to get back, but Eddie sees everything he wants to say on his face. What did you think I was doing? He nearly snarls, calling Red Lobster for takeout.
Yeah, that is one of my favorite parts where during this whole thing is when, Roland realizes. Now, did you put it together, like, before this moment? Like, when you were reading the first time, for instance?
No,
do you recall?
I'm not a huge seafood fan, so I've never had crab, and that's what these are supposed to be like, like crab-type creatures. So the only hint that I really can see is that, they're still on the beach, and there's obviously, the shot, and then there's whitish pink meat, which if I, eaten crab, I would know that. Whitish pink, whitish, kind of meat is crab meat.
Yeah.
So I know, and then right there, I was kind of like with Roland there, because you remember this part of the book, like the whole introduction to Eddie, and before that with Roland losing his fingers. I was pissed at you for not giving me any kind of a warning. Just like, to see like a character who stood through everything that he did in Gunslinger, to get just like instantly handicapped by losing his right fingers, and everything, and poisoned, and he's so weak that he has to depend on a heroin junkie and everything. It's just like, dude, what the hell, man? Like, where's the series going and everything? And then just to see here that I couldn't imagine that, dude, getting poisoned by an animal and then having to eat the fucker.
In the eating them, because that's the thing is, like, from my perspective, I definitely suspected. I'm not really a massive seafood fan either, but I definitely know what it looks like. So when it was like whitish pink, I'm like, uh-oh. I think I know what's going on here. But no, like, because like ultimately, like, Roland getting bit by these creatures is why he's in such a bad way to begin with, right? Yeah. So there's part of me that's like, my perspective, I remember reading the first time, I remember just thinking like, well, wait a minute, like, is their meat going to be poisoned too? Is he just like basically undoing everything these drugs might be doing for Roland, So I was like somewhat concerned, probably just like Roland is, but more in the perspective of like maybe being defensive for Roland, where it's just like, oh, this fucking junkie's feeding him like the same poison that he's already poisoned with, Yeah. So that was my perspective.
Yeah, but then like right here, like, so it goes on a little bit, and Eddie smiles. I like to think maybe I got one of the ones that ate Jack. I like to think that I'm eating that dink. It like eases my mind, One of them ate part of me too. The gunslinger huss out. 2 fingers, 1 toe. That's also cool. Eddie keeps smiling. But right there, that's where I kind of like. At first, I had the same reaction, like, oh God, like these things aren't good for you, and they poisoned Roland. Then I was like, oh wait a minute, people eat rattlesnakes and they're venomous. People eat venomous animals all the time, but that doesn't necessarily make it this where the meat's going to be poisoned. So that's where I kind of settled down. And then Eddie kind of also points it out, like, it's a little bit before this. He says, oh, actually, I forgot that Eddie actually makes the point of rattlesnakes. That's where I was remembered that. As far as poison goes, rattlesnakes are poison, but people eat them. Rattlesnakes taste real good, like chicken. I read that somewhere. So, that's what I was remembering, was that line right there. Yeah. And then, like, later on, it says, that's also cool. Eddie keeps smiling. His face is pallid, shark-like, but some of that ill look has gone now, and the smell of shit and death which has hung around him like a shroud seems to be going away. Fuck yourself, the gunslinger husk. Roland shows a flash of spirit, Eddie cries. Maybe you ain't gonna die after all, darling. I think that's marvelous.
Yeah, I always love it when Roland kind of, he's done it a few times now, where like he kind of breaks the general character that we're expecting from him, and this is definitely one of those times, and I definitely it's something I appreciate for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then a little bit further down, it says they looked into each other's eyes, and Eddie said, all right, North, the gunslinger mouth. North, I told you. Has he told him that? He thinks so, but it's lost in the shuffle. So I love that too, because now you're kind of showing the fact that Roland is not necessarily remembering clearly everything that we're seeing here. There is some ambiguity in his mind. It's like, wait, because us as readers are like, yeah, you already told him that, but for him, it's like, I told him that. Wait, did I tell him that? So I like that, because it kind of gives you more insight into what's going on with the characters here. Is the shuffle is a lot more disorienting to him than it is to us reading it here and being able to kind of analyze it from afar.
That's interesting you think of it that way, because I think of it as, okay, was the stuff that we read earlier, was that actually like hallucination.
Real. Yeah.
Yeah. I always take it that way whenever I read stuff like that. Like, do I remember that right? Did I actually do that? And then it's like, I don't know, did you?
Yeah.
Kind of thing. I don't take it for a great, I don't take it as a, if I can't if the character can't trust it, I can't trust it is how I usually go.
Yeah.
So that's interesting that you would go that way, saying like, oh, it's just Roland's memory and he's having issues with it. And me, it's like, fuck, did that really happen or not? Like, I don't know.
Yeah.
If he doesn't know, how am I supposed to know?
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
Yeah, it's just interesting, two different takes on the same sentence there. That's one of the reasons why I love these book clubs, is because we get so many different points of view with stuff like that. But I've never thought of it that way. I've always thought of it as like, well, shit, did it really happen then? He's the narrator kind of guy, like he should know. If he doesn't know, then fuck, how do I know?
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
Then of course Eddie.
God, yeah.
Then Eddie kind of gets mad here again. He says, "How do you know?" Eddie screamed at him in sudden frustration. He raised his fist as if to strike Roland and lowered them. I just know, and this is like not quotation marks because he's just mouthing this, right? He's kind of lost his voice here. He says, "I just know. So why do you waste my time and energy asking me foolish questions?" He wanted to reply. So this not mouthing. This is just what he's saying in his head. Then it says, "But before he can, the cards shuffle." And then the next, right after that, it says, being dragged along, bounced and bumped his head, lolling helplessly from one side to the other, bound to some kind of weird travois by his own gun belts, and he could hear Eddie Dean singing a song, which is weirdly familiar. He at first believes this must be delirium dream. So I guess that goes to your point here, that, Roland is maybe not even sure that he's all there consciously or whatever. Yeah. And then the quote here, "Hey Jude, don't make it bad, take a sad song and make it better." So Eddie's obviously singing "Hey Jude" by the Beatles,
which we've heard before.
Yeah, we've heard
in the Gunslinger's world.
Yeah, honky tonk version, but we did indeed hear it. And then Roland, he thinks, "Where did you hear that?" He wanted to ask, "Did you hear me singing it, Eddie? And where are we?" But before he can ask anything, shuffle. Yeah, so I like that because now the confusion that we had in book one, Roland is having because like us, we're like, wait a minute. We're in a different world. We're trying to catch our bearings. Like, are we in a different world? Are we in our world that's later? Is this the post-apocalyptic? Like, what is this? Then you hear something like the Beatles, and you're like, oh, okay, this is our world. Then you see certain things, and it's like, okay, this is. But then there's other things you see, and you're like, no, guess it isn't.
Yeah, and then Roland takes a magical doorway to get to our world. And we know that that's our world because, JFK and New York City and cab drivers and pizza trucks and stuff like that. You're like,
yeah.
Oh, Eddie's coming from our world. And then you're like, but wait a minute, what the fuck? Roland has "Hey Jude" in his world. Yeah,
so it's kind of cool to see him sharing the same, like, kind of like in character, but he's actually, when he hears it, he's just like, wait, his first thought is, well, maybe I was singing it and Eddie picked it up for me,
Yeah.
And which would be a common thing. Honestly, if it were reversed and Roland were dragging Eddie and singing it, I bet you Eddie would think the exact same thing. Which is what I love. Like, I love that, like, dichotomy of, like, this weird world that King is putting together.
Right.
Is that there's all this, like, overlap that, like, literally if you flip these two and it was Roland hadn't got bit by any of the lobstrosities, he was still 100% gunslinger, which you would have liked. And he was dragging, Eddie in his full-on withdrawals. And this is the same scene was happening. You could literally write it the same way. And it'd be Eddie thinking, like, oh, man, I must have been singing it in my days of whatever, and he picked it up from me.
Or he heard it on the cab's radio station or something like that, and everything like that. So
yeah, definitely. What do you got next?
After this next shuffle, Court would bash the kid's head in if he saw that contraption. Roland thinks, looking at the travois upon which he was spent the day, and laughs. It ain't much of a laugh. It sounds like one of those waves dropping its load of stones on the beach. Basically, I skipped ahead because basically it just kind of describes the travois, which we could all kind of imagine. Eddie doesn't exactly have a sporting goods store or a camping store to go and build a stretcher on.
Yeah.
Which is basically what a travois is for you at home that don't know that. It's kind of like a homemade version of a stretcher. Basically describes like using, like branches and stuff like that and gun belts and stuff like that. But then a little bit farther down, I wrote that I highlighted this as well. Court would not have struck him because is it right there? Let me double check. Yeah, that's right. Court would not have struck him because, sick as he was, Eddie had at least done more than squat on his hunkers and bewail his fate. He had made something, had tried, and Court might have offered one of those abrupt, almost grudging compliments before, because crazy as the thing looked, it worked. The long tracks stretch back down the beach to a point where they seem to come together at the rim. A perspective proved that. So just kind of like an interesting, like, he starts off the thought with at the very beginning of the shuffle, the court would beat the hell out of Eddie for making this monstrosity of a trill voice, which Roland obviously with his training could have made a way better one. And then we go through the description of it, and then Roland realizes, probably wouldn't beat him because, hey, it fucking works.
Yeah.
I don't know why, but I always like that because it kind of gives you a little bit more insight into Court as well.
Yeah.
Where, like, he would beat him, but then when he realized that, oh, wait, Court wouldn't have beat him because he had actually done something. Instead of just sitting there, the whining and crying and, oh, how am I going to get him up the beach? I can't do this. I'm having heroin withdrawal. Eddie was strong enough to do that, to build a trill voice and drag this sorry-ass gunslinger, up the beach that's, just dead weight, basically.
Yeah.
And so it's just kind of interesting to also, because that gives you a little bit more insight into Eddie's character as well, is that, dude, say what you want about this junkie, Matt. He sure as hell is one tough character.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. He's definitely earning his keep in a lot of ways in a new world, dealing with, like, his own issues, that kind of stuff for sure, yeah.
I mean, just in the short time, let's think through what Eddie's gone through so far since we met him. He found out there was someone in his head that was from another world. He accepted that. That man helped him escape customs and DEA agents busting him for a good long while with how much cocaine he had on him.
Yeah. He'd definitely be able to have enough to get the, with what is it, like...
possession with intent to sell.
To distribute. Yeah, intent to distribute. Yeah,
that's the icing on the cake. Whenever you get that,
that's when they can get you from being just a druggie that's using drugs to, like, really throwing the book at you under, like, certain laws of the United States.
Yeah.
Although I guess I don't know if some of those would exist in this time period, though. I mean, he'd be going away.
It was 87, yeah.
Yeah, but yeah, like there was like the mid-90s, there were some really big laws passed that would like throw like 30, 40-year sentences at guys.
Yeah, because you've done research into like the war on drugs and stuff like that, haven't you?
Yeah, there was a really big thing of it back in like I said, it was like the mid-90s. So he definitely would have been in trouble and probably would have been going to prison for a good long while. But it definitely would have been worse if he were, in 95, 96 versus.
Well, that's one of the reasons
87.
why they came at him so hard is because they knew that they had a good bust. This is someone that. And the other thing also is that if they could have turned him and flipped him, who was having him packed for, and everything like that. So it was a big bust to go from that to ending up in a shootout and everything like that, naked and everything, and now here he is dragging someone while going through heroin withdrawals. I don't know about you, man. I get a Charlie horse, and I'm like, I can't even walk. I mean, this guy's got heroin withdrawals, and he's dragging, a 200-pound man up the beach.
Yeah, indeed. I do want to backtrack one tiny bit here, and it says the main supports were 2 cottonwood branches of approximately the same length and thickness, blow down, the gunslinger presumed. He had used the smaller branches as a support, attached them to the support poles with a crazy conglomeration of stuff, gun belts, glue strings that had held the devil powder to his chest, so he's even using like the old tape there. And it says even the rawhide thong from the gunslinger's hat.
Oh, we get a Roland watch. We got a hat.
Yeah, so if you're listening to our roundtables, you know the significance of that. There's definitely, I guess we could even mention it for the book clubs because we've seen it already now. Like, for instance, in the first number of paragraphs of this entire story, it says something about his hat that was long lost, like, when it's describing Roland. So it's one of these weird things, call it whatever you will, whether it's just like continuity errors, but there's something that his hat kind of comes and goes.
And that was one of the reasons why we talked about it on the round table, is that, do you picture Roland with a hat? Do you picture him without a hat, is what we talked about. And so we kind of got into a little joke where since I was reading through the series at the time, I would do a Roland hat watch, but we started that after I got to.
We were a ways in.
I was in book 3 when we started that, because that's where I remember my notes came from, is book 3.
Yeah.
And so I totally missed that one, but yeah, the rawhide thong of Roland's hat. Cody also corrected us in the chat. It's pronounced Travois. The S on the end is silent. So Travois, not Travois. So Travois.
Interesting.
English is a fascinating language.
Although I have a feeling that may not be English in Origins. And then, like, to finish that out, it says, and Eddie's own sneaker laces. He had laid the gunslinger's bedroll over the supports. So it's just an interesting thing, with what they have. He's gotten sticks from, like, fallen trees or whatever, and you're talking he's used, like, the whole jumble of Scotch tape. He's used every bit of, like, string or rope he can to, like, tie this stuff together. So it's really, for someone that's has grown up, we'll find out here in this chapter, but we kind of know he's a New York kid, right? He's not necessarily one that was probably as exposed to, like, roughing it like this. So he's done a good job. I'll definitely give him credit for that.
Yeah, I mean, he's already kind of said it. He kind of said it kind of jokingly, but I always took it kind of as his word. He's from Brooklyn. Yeah, I always get it mixed up, but he's from Brooklyn. He's not exactly the outdoorsy type. He doesn't. Maybe it's just me. I'm a little prejudiced in this manner. If someone says they're from New York City, I don't take them as outdoorsy.
No.
It's just like ingrained in me that if someone's like, "Yeah, New York City," I was like, "Yep, those are all city dwellers. Those people don't even know how to camp or anything like that." Yeah,
just like you could easily say us, we wouldn't know how to handle ourselves in the big city.
Yeah, exactly. No, it's definitely a Is it a prejudice? I mean, is that an actual prejudice, or is that just like a?
No, I mean, yeah, it is because you're prejudging. People,
prejudging.
Right?
Okay, yeah, I get you.
Break down the word prejudice. It's prejudge, basically.
Yeah, okay.
So, yeah, it's true, but I would say that it's probably a safe assumption that Eddie didn't spend a whole lot of time in his youth
in the outdoors.
Going to like summer camps and stuff. I just don't. It just doesn't fit the kind of person that so far that we've seen.
Exactly.
So
even before the stuff we get into later in this chapter is just like a lot of this is just not screaming outdoorsy type.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely not. I mean, even when eating the lobstrosities, potentially, I mean, as an outdoorsman, like, if somebody's more outdoorsy, would they just kill an animal that's unknown to them and eat it?
No.
I mean,
no.
Yeah, I don't. I mean, I don't know. I don't know if I would. It would take me quite a stretch of hunger to get into a spot where I'd eat, whatever.
A random animal.
Yeah, exactly. That I had no comprehension of. Because I mean, that is the thing that you can't really put to a real outdoorsman, is because most outdoorsmen are not going to cross into another world with completely unfamiliar terrain and animals,
and with no supplies either. I mean, you're talking outdoorsmen. I mean, like, I camp, right? But I camp prepared. Like, I take a cooler, I have food. I went camping last weekend and I had I had food ready. I had a grill. I cooked up some steaks. We made tacos, that kind of thing.
Yeah,
and everything. I was ready. Now, if someone's like, "Okay, here, go spend a week in the wilderness," I'd be like, "Where's my food?" They'd be like, "You have to find it." I'd be like, "Where?" I don't even know where tacos live.
Taco burrows.
Taco burrows.
Oh, indeed. And then a little bit further down here, my next note is, dinner will soon be served, master.
That's my next
Eddie
note.
says, you have your choice of fillet of creepy crawler or fillet of creepy crawler. Which strikes your fancy, master? I don't understand you, the gunslinger said. Sure you do, Eddie said. You just don't have any sense of humor. What happened to it? Shot off in one war or another, I guess. So, yeah, I like that. That's, I mean, it ultimately comes down to, like, the ultimate challenge with these two characters is that Eddie is obviously a mouthy, humorous person, and Roland is about as far from that as possible. He's about as, I don't know, he's not, he doesn't have a sense of humor. I think we could easily say that.
Yeah.
And I think that's the ultimate, like, odd couple thing to throw these two together.
Yep.
So... Oh, what do you got next?
Roland says, "You look a little better too," Roland ventures. His voice cracks on the last two words like the voice of a young boy. If I don't stop talking soon, he thought, I won't be able to talk at all again. And it just kind of like, oh man, like, when you think about it, it's kind of a heavy statement, dude. I mean, could you imagine being put into a situation like this and then being like, okay, Ted, you can only say 15 words at a time.
Yeah.
You know?
How many times have you lost your voice in your life?
I could probably count them on both hands.
Like, legit lost your voice.
Probably count them on one hand then.
Yeah. It hasn't happened to me much in my life, but I remember it being fairly frustrating.
It was very frustrating. I mean, you can imagine how frustrating it was for me. I mean, you know how much I love to talk, so...
Yeah, me too. I mean, that's the reason we're doing this, right?
Exactly.
I don't think a lot of quiet people do podcasts.
This is the quiet podcast where you just get to listen to us breathe.
Where we sit here and silently contemplate the larger things of the universe. You just listen to us thinking.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Zen Podcast. We will be thinking for 3 hours today.
Although I wonder if there would be someone that would do something like that for
There probably is someone that does that. What's the rule? There's a podcast for everything.
Yeah. Is there a podcast for silent contemplation where it's like I don't know. I mean, I guess it couldn't be silent. You'd have to do what do you do? Like the things, the noise makers that will like play like the sound of a beach or whatever you.
Ambient noise.
Yeah, ambient noise.
When you go to sleep with the waves crashing over the beach.
Dead a chick? You want beach noises, right?
Oh God, you would do that to me.
Oh yeah.
You'd be like, "Hey man, I had the best night's sleep last night." Oh yeah, what happened? I got this tape. It's a
For those younger people, a tape is a physical thing that had actual.
I got this iPod with ocean noises on there. I'm hip. Don't call me old. And I'd be like, oh yeah. I'd go home. I'd plug it in. I'd get settled in bed. Done a trick, and I'd be like, motherfucker. Come flying up back to your house and just beat the shit out of you. Fucking hate the lobstrosities, dude.
Oh, do you? I didn't know that.
You asshole.
And then a little bit further down, it says, I guess I'll live. He looks at Roland's expressionlessly. You'll never know how close it was a couple of times, though. Once I took one of your guns and put it against my head, cocked it, held it there for a while, and then took it away. Eased the hammer down and shoved it back in your holster. Under the night, I had a convulsion. I think it was the second night, but I'm not sure. He shakes his head and says something the gunslinger both does and doesn't understand. Michigan seems like a dream to me now. So I feel like there is another thing, I guess, where you kind of get like a little bit of an insight now in retrospect of what Eddie had been going through while we had been kind of jumping around Roland's delirium. Point of putting one of Roland's revolvers to his head. That's pretty extreme, I suppose. Especially because we haven't really seen Eddie necessarily being one that's been reckless. And or putting his life on the line. He's not like a daredevil. They didn't put him on that plane because he was like, I don't give a fuck if I get caught.
No, he was a safe bet.
Yeah, he's one that he can kind of pass as like respectable, and he's going to be careful. He's got a little bit of smarts to him, like he's one that could probably get through it. So like he's not like this I don't know, like went through the hair devil without a cause type thing. So, for him to get to a spot to putting a gun to his head is, I don't know, it tells you something about where he's at.
Yeah.
And then Roland says, what stopped you from pulling the trigger? And then Eddie says, well, this is the only pair of pants I got, Eddie said. At the last second, I thought if I pull the trigger and it's one of those dud shells, I'd never get up the guts to do it again. And once you shit your pants, you got to wash them right away or live with the stink forever. Henry told me that. He said he learned it in Nam. And since it was nighttime with Lester the lobster out, not to mention all of his friends, and then he trails off. But the gunslinger is laughing hard. Although only on an occasional crack of sound actually escapes his lips. So he's still dealing with not necessarily having a voice. So
there's actually a part up here that you kind of skipped. It says, although his voice is down to that husky murmur again, and he knows he shouldn't be talking at all, the gunslinger has to know one thing, and that's where he has to wait. What stopped him from pulling the trigger. Yeah, Roland's voice is not in a good position. It's not.
Yeah, no doubt. And then actually coming up here in the next little bit, I actually have our next sound clip. So we'll go ahead and take a listen to that real quick.
Wait, he whispers, and Eddie looks at him. Why, really? I guess 'cause you needed me. If I'd killed myself, you would have died. Later on, after you're really on your feet again, I may, re-examine my options. He looks around and sighs deeply. There may be a Disneyland or Coney Island somewhere in your world, Roland, but what I've seen of it so far really doesn't interest me much. He starts away, pauses, and looks back again at Roland. His face is somber, although some of the sickly pallor has left it. The shakes have become no more than occasional tremors. Sometimes you really don't understand me, do you? No, the gunslinger whispers. Sometimes I don't. Song. Corny, but true. It's just another way of being hooked through the bag. Eddie gazes at him. But when it comes to that, you're clean, aren't you? Roland watches him. Except for your tower. Eddie utters a short laugh. You're a tower junkie, Roland. Which war was it? Roland whispers. What? The one where you got your sense of nobility and purpose shot off. Eddie recoils as if Roland has reached out and slapped him.
Yeah, so that's a pretty good section there, and of course, great Frank Muller, Eddie Dean voice there. It's always good to get him in, at least for that. There's a lot in that. I love the I guess the whole point of it there, just to kind of break it down. I mean, I think his ultimate point, to be needed is important. And I feel like that also says something about Eddie, because I feel like there's certain people that are far more prone to that kind of thought process than others. So I don't think that, like, I don't want to say it's not like a universal thing, but for him to know that and understand that is probably tells us that he's a lot more inclined to that, which tells us a little bit probably about his relationship with his brother, especially in the later periods, instead of, I mean, whatever, because he is the younger brother. But, you know, in general, it's probably going to be something that's a defining feature, because we've been kind of seeing defining features of Roland over the last, book and a half. Yeah. And, you know, this might be one to kind of throws a flare to us of what kind of person Eddie is and the kind of things that he needs, and he needs to be needed.
You know what I never realized is that's maybe one of the reasons why I'm really attached to Eddie, is because I'm one of those people. I mean, you've known me for nigh on 2 decades now, and you know that I'm a social bug. I like hanging out. I like having people and everything like that, and it's something that I get alone time. I get sick of it real fast. Whereas me, I can get like 2 weeks and just go to like a cabin in the woods and be all by myself, and I'd just be like, paradise. You're one of the only people I know who takes multiple staycations a year. Yeah. It's what you do. You like just relaxing at home, watching whatever the hell you want, and just, you know, doing whatever the hell you want. Not having a schedule, going and getting food when you want. Oh, there's a movie I want to go see. Okay, let's go see it. Yeah. You know, kind of winging it kind of thing for your vacation. I've tried that vacation twice since I've known you. Both times I started getting a little freaking crazy at the end. Like, okay, I need people to hang out with. Like, I got to go do something. Yeah. It's just kind of interesting to see that kind of dynamic play out here in the book. We have that kind of similar, you know. Like, I'm always down to hang out with you and everything like that. And it's just like, man, I feel like I'm bugging Ted if I ask him to hang out again. You just saw me yesterday recorded the podcast. Maybe I shouldn't, you know, kind of thing, you know? Yeah, no, I mean, and I've definitely become far more social over even the time that we've known each other. Yeah. But it's definitely my nature is to like easily be more reclusive, not reclusive necessarily, like to avoid human contact, but because loneliness has an implication to it. Being alone does not bother me. Yeah, at all. It just doesn't. You're a very solitary creature. Yeah, exactly. I see no wrong in that. Yeah. The same thing with I feel like there's also the thing too where if you're hanging out with someone and maybe you're like have a football game on or something, right? There's 2 types of people. There's the type of people that want to have conversation going on, and there's the type of people that could sit there for the whole 3.5 hour game and not say a word. Except like, oh, nice play. Yeah, just mindless, like whatever. And I feel like I'm far more in that category. Like I don't need to like conversate necessarily. Yeah. Not that I like conversation bothers me, but it's just one of those like, if we're gonna, you know, whatever. Even if it was just like, hey, me and you, we're gonna go and watch the original 3 Star Wars movies as a marathon. Like, I could go through, even though we've seen them a million times and we know them inside and out. Like, it's not and it's not that like I have to be zoned in on the movie, but like. That's why I picked Star Wars, because it's something we've all seen. Yeah. Like, I wouldn't need to talk for whatever that would be, 6 some odd or 9 hours, something like, or well, somewhere in the 8 hour range. I think that's what it was 8 hour range. Yeah, we've done that before, but we've also done a 1 through 6 marathon, which gotta admit, I didn't make it. Yeah, you did. You fell asleep on that one. I did. After 12 hours, I definitely fell asleep. And then I love this. He says, let's see, you'd use me and toss me away like a paper bag if that's what it came down to.
And I love that because we as an audience already know that about Roland. We've seen him do it.
Yeah.
And we've seen him do it to a character that you would say is probably one that he should care more about than Eddie.
Oh, absolutely.
If it came down to Eddie and Jake, I feel like Jake is one that he should have more of like a caring for versus Eddie, and he didn't. So like we know from experience that that line right there, that sentence is 100% true.
Yeah.
Now,
there's something here that is interesting going along with what you're saying, is that, you wouldn't be able to help yourself. This is what Eddie's saying to him. If I was lying on the beach there screaming for help, you'd walk over me if I was between you and your goddamn tower. Isn't that pretty close to the truth? Roland says nothing, only watches Eddie. Now,
he doesn't deny it.
A lot of people would take that as, his voice is, he can't talk and everything like that. But I'm with you.
Yeah.
He does not deny that because he fucking knows.
And when it says he only watches Eddie, he's watching him to get his reaction.
Yeah.
It's like a poker player. It's like, I feel like you could tell him plenty with your eyes, and just looking at him, it's just kind of a way of like, sometimes you maybe even in real life had those arguments with people where someone says something, like, oh, well, you think this or you whatever. And if it's the truth, you don't have to say, yeah, if it's like an argument, you can just just look at him. You're not denying it, and that's just looking at him is enough for them to know it's true.
Silence is consent, right?
Yeah, so it's just like one of those like I've been in that where I've had arguments with people, like they like say something that is true, they take exception to it, and it's just like I don't have to say yeah, I just let them keep going. I give them a look where it's just like yeah, you're right.
There's a very important line here right at the end of this sound clip. I was wondering what your thoughts on were it.
I have one a little bit where we were just talking. Do you
after that?
Okay, let me hit this one first, and then we'll go to what you're talking about, because I feel like this is a very an interesting one, because I don't know where we're at in terms of understanding, but this Eddie is pretty clairvoyant in this. He said, "God fucked you, my friend. You're just smart enough to do it, so it would hurt you to do that, and just hard enough so that you'd go ahead and do it anyway." So I feel like that right there is like an encapsulation of Roland, right? And we've talked about that now through some of what Court has said and stuff, and so we kind of know who Roland is. But yeah, it is one of those things where it's interesting to think about that, like. Roland is just smart enough to be hurt by like a sacrifice, say Jake, right? But he's like cold and calculated enough to do it. Like, and like, so again, if you apply that to Jake, we've already seen it happen. So, but it's interesting that Eddie is clairvoyant enough to see that. I don't know. I just found that really interesting. I found it a really, really cool, like I underlined that one, like beyond just highlighting. 'Cause I'm like, that right there is like encapsulating of this character now that we've been reading a book and a half on, and we're getting it from Eddie. That's the one that calls him on it, so like for one, bravo to Eddie for being able to like see that. And part two of it is like, yeah, there you go. Like, I feel like if you're going to have like a Wikipedia quotes section of Roland quotes and or quotes about Roland, I feel like this one should be right at the top. Because I feel like it's in a nutshell, it's his entire being. Like he's smart enough to understand the loss and to be hurt by the loss of, like, say Jake, and Eddie's speculating that himself would be the same way, but he's cold enough to like not stop himself. He's just going to do it. Like he did. He let Jake go. So I find it really, really just a huge thing I wanted to circle on, because it's just a huge statement. And also, like I said, if nothing else, give bravo to your boy for being able to see it, because I don't know, have we necessarily seen Eddie being super... I mean, so far, there's been a few times that he's noticed some stuff, but in general, we've seen Roland pointing shit out to him, right? Like...
yeah, a lot of stuff has
like
been...
when he was in his head and stuff, there's a lot of times where Roland's like, no, there's 5 people following you, or whatever else. It feels like in general, or Roland's like, hey, those fucking army women are onto you. Like, and Eddie was blind to. Like, it's been in those things where you can't necessarily say that Eddie is like this really like killer poker player, but is this showing that maybe he's growing in that, and he's able to like to read through Roland in this short time that he's been with him now to know that very foundational truth.
Yeah, I think it takes it back to the conversation not the conversation, but the statement that Roland makes when they're on the airplane about Eddie may not be as slow and plodding as the rest in this world that are all fat and slow, but he's definitely slower than Roland, but he's not as slow as everyone else.
Yeah.
And that's the way I think of it here is like, you know, Eddie has some insight into Roland and knows exactly who he is and everything like that. And the thing I was going to ask you actually pertains largely to what you're talking about here is that Eddie calls him exactly on it. You know, like, you're one of those people that it would happen. You'd make a sacrifice. It hurt just a little bit, but you would still go on, kind of thing.
Yeah, I don't know whether you said that in this or whether it's this or the roundtables, but I have definitely said that I definitely gravitated to Roland, and I could even relay it to this is like in this point, reading the book for the first time, I don't like Eddie. I don't trust Eddie. Mm-hmm. Roland's my boy. I'm able to connect to him. Yeah, just like that ability to just like do what must be done. I mean, we've talked about it in terms of like just having the fun, nerdy conversation of like a zombie apocalypse. And I've told you, like, if you want to survive, roll with me. You may not like what I would do to like,
and how you would treat people,
and how I would treat people and stuff. But at the same time, I can guarantee you'll survive. Yep. You know, it's just like, but it's one of those things we've had that debate. I mean, it's all just fun. Like, we're not like one of those loons that thinks that shit's actually going to happen. But like, it's one of those, like, it does come down to like, it's somewhat of a mirror to, you know, especially like the great old zombie movies of like George Romero, because I feel like it's a reflection on humanity. And I feel like in a situation like that, I'd be able to like flip and just be as cold and calculated as needed to be to where
as
like
Roland is.
We're going to survive this. Yeah, but we're going to have to do it this way. We're not going to be like, you know, oh God, my wife got bit, we're going to hide it and like whatever. No, we fucking shoot her the first second we know that she's been bit. Sorry, that's just the way it happens. Like, you can't allow connection to be a weakness. So
it's actually interesting that you brought that up, because it's along the lines of what I want to talk about here, is that Roland makes this what most people would think of as kind of a joke, where Eddie calls him, except for your tower. Eddie utters a short laugh. You're a tower junkie. Which war was it? Roland whispers. What? The one where you got your sense of nobility and purpose shot off. And I circled back to this 3 times while I was reading. Like, I got past it, and then I had to go back to it and think about it, because that's kind of a loaded question there for Roland to ask that, because at this point, do we know what Roland's purpose is?
No, we had that sales pitch at the end of the last episode when Eddie asked him, "What are you offering me? What's for me beyond that door?" Type thing. And so we kind of had like that quick sales pitch, and we talked about how it's kind of like one of our first inclinations of the larger scale of what the story is. Yeah. But it's still very, very vague. We don't know a lot yet.
What I reminisce this to, and this is not a spoiler in any way, but what I reminisce this to is if a person ran across Frodo Baggins partway through Two Towers, which is the middle Lord of the Rings book, movie / you know, there, and
middle of the journey,
starts questioning Frodo and his purposes and lecturing him and stuff like that. And it kind of makes me draw back a little bit from Eddie here, even though he's my boy and everything like that. Makes me kind of draw back a little bit, because it's like, you know, Roland puts him in his place with one sentence.
Yeah.
Where's your purpose?
But see, you know, just as just to interject a tiny bit, is I feel like you have a lot in common with Eddie, except for that. I feel like you would have that sense of nobility, just who you are. You're the straight-laced, you know, hero type that, you know, whatever. So like, I feel like you share some with Eddie, but not everything with Eddie. You're like kind of a hybrid of Eddie and Roland in a way.
Which is really weird, because there are times where I just look at Eddie and just go, dude, what the fuck are you doing?
Yeah. So it is.
And this is one of them.
Yeah, exactly. So like with that, like, you know, so I could see where you're pulling back from Eddie a tiny bit, because in that way, you're not like Eddie at all. Like, in fact, I don't think you could, if I were to just, as a friend of 17 years, just make a call, I'd say you wouldn't be, you can't even comprehend where Eddie's coming from. Yeah. Just for the type that you are. It's just, it's not. So
the big thing, I can see that. The big thing would be is if someone showed up and said, hey, I'm on a quest to save this or to save that or to do this, I'd be like, okay, where are we going? What are we doing?
Yeah.
Who are we going with? How are we getting there? You know, I'd be that guy. You know? Yeah. Like you're talking about is I got that sense of purpose and nobility where someone's like, hey, we got to go do this to save this. And I'd be like, okay.
Yeah.
You know, oh, you're a magic dude that needs to save, you know, Middle Earth. Oh, okay, let's go. Let's go,
Yeah.
little hobbit dude. Let's get you to Mountain Dew kind of thing.
And in a way, to encapsulate it even more, is that you're a Luke kid, not a Han kid.
I'm a Luke kid.
And I feel like we've even had a debate about, I feel like at one point you believe that Han knew full well when he left in episode 4
Yep.
that he was going to come back. And I believe that's absolutely not true. I feel that Han was totally in it for himself. And I feel that if anything, it was probably Chewie that, convinced him to go back, or finally that like seed of goodness he had in him was enough to be like, okay, fuck, we're turning this ship around to go help them. But I don't feel that he was just like walking out to be theatrical and be like, oh, I know I'm gonna show up anyway. I feel like he's so far away from that like I said, like it's like the Grinch's heart. He has the Grinch's heart of like goodness, but it took something. And I to this day, since I was a kid, I've always credited it to Chewie. I'm sure it was Chewie that's like, hey dude, we really should be helping these people, And I feel like when you took the side of like, no, Han always knew he was going to help, I feel like that comes from your nature. You're putting your nature on him. You wouldn't have even left. If it was you that was
I'd have
Han,
been Luke.
if it was you that was Han, that Falcon would have been flying in from the first bit of the Battle of Yavin.
Yeah.
So in that way, to make it into Star Wars senses, you're definitely the Luke and not a Han in terms of character styles. So yeah. Just another way of saying it, I suppose.
And to keep with the Lord of the Rings, for those of you,
I guess that
with Lord of the Rings, I'm a very Sam.
Yeah.
My friend's going to go on a quest. Tad says, hey, I got to go do this. I'll be like, all right, dealer, where are we going? What are we doing? What do you need from me?
Yeah.
Kind of thing. I mean, I've already been like that. I mean, just recently with your other project, with the movie that you were filming and everything like that. Man, I'm all about it, man. What do you need? What do you need? What do you need from me?
Yeah.
And everything.
Yeah. So that's definitely something that Eddie doesn't have. It's just not in his nature necessarily. He's a little bit, I don't want to say it's selfish. I feel like it can be portrayed as selfish, but I feel like it's just one of those things that like, just because someone doesn't have nobility doesn't mean that they're selfish. It just means that they're there's no way to say it that doesn't sound like that. Because what I was going to say is they're just not as
one thing,
they're not as willing to put themselves on the line for something that they don't fully believe in.
Right.
And that again, that comes so fucking close to being just calling them selfish, but it really isn't.
I definitely get what you're saying. These are the people that need to have they're the people who, when you say, hey, we need to go declare war on these people, they're going to be like, okay, why?
Yeah.
What'd they do?
Yeah.
No.
Or namely, what did they do to me?
Yeah. What? How does that affect me?
Yeah.
They're the type of people that when that shit hits the fan.
Was that in Lord of the Rings? Wasn't there someone that kind of gave the sense of like it was
Treebeard, the Ents. We've always been here. So what if there's a war?
Yeah,
kind of thing. And then they find out that they're cutting down trees, and that's where he's like, all right, I'm going to fuck your shit up.
Yeah, maybe I'm thinking of something. There's something else I'm thinking of where it's in that realm of just like, yeah, how does it? I feel like it's more like humanistic.
It was you could also do it for the Rohan. Why would we go to help Gondor? They didn't come to help us.
That's who I'm thinking.
That's probably who you're thinking of.
Yeah.
There's a couple of them in Lord of the Rings, and Eddie's that type of person. It's like, okay, well, how does that affect me? What does this mean for me and everything?
You also have it in Game of Thrones. There's a character that's just like my purpose as a leader of a section of this world. I'm in charge of these people. My role is to ensure the lives of these people. So why should I risk my people to fight your war when literally you're asking me to put the people I'm supposed to protect on the front line for you? Like, why?
Why?
And I feel like I don't feel that's a selfish thing. I don't think that's a cowardice thing. It's just one of those things where it's just like, it's asking the hard question, whereas like someone like Sam or someone doesn't ask that hard question, and you may not ask that hard question. You just dive in.
I'm that guy. I'm that guy that says when someone rides past and says, we're going to go fix the world. There's problem A, and we need to do solution B to fix it. All right, hold on. Let me grab my sword. Let's go. Honey, I'll be back. Kind of thing. Oh, we're going to fix problem A with solution B? Sounds good. Sign me up for C while we're at it, too, kind of thing.
Yeah.
I'm not the person that's like, wait, well, hold on. A plus, A is not necessarily a bad thing. Why are we doing, I'm not that guy.
Yeah.
I'm the guy that's like, okay, well, if we need to fix something, let's fix it. And that's the thing here is that's what pulled me back from Eddie, and it's what really kind of opened my eyes with Roland, especially with that line, like, where's your sense of nobility and purpose? The purpose one is what really, really struck me. Is like, at this point, we don't even know what Roland's purpose is.
Yeah.
We just know that he has one,
and he does have one, whereas Eddie doesn't, and probably hasn't most of his life. So
yeah.
It's definitely an interesting dichotomy here with these two characters. Let's see. So I don't have anything else until the next shuffle. Do you got anything through the rest of this section?
Let me double check real fast. Nope.
Okay, so then we get through the next shuffle, and then my first notes, a little bit in, it's just past. Well, I guess it's the tail end of the first paragraph, even though we come into this paragraph mid sentence again, like we've had before. My note starts. He remembered wondering what had happened to make their brothering so difficult. Sorry, yeah, just totally had a brain cramp there. Made their brothering so difficult, but after Eddie had begun haltingly and with a sort of resentful anger that proceeded from deep pain, the gunslinger could have stopped him. He could have told him, "Don't bother, Eddie. I understand everything." Except that would have helped Eddie. Eddie was talking to help Henry because Henry was dead. He was talking to bury Henry for good, and that reminded himself that although Henry was dead, Eddie wasn't. So this is kind of like the decompression for Eddie in a lot of ways.
What we were talking about earlier.
What I find interesting, is that idea where Roland's like, "Don't bother, Eddie. I understand everything," and I feel like that is something that like happens a lot even in our society. How often does someone start telling you a story and you're just like instantly you're like, I know how this goes, It's like one of those, like in a movie you'd just say it's just such a used archetype that you're able to latch onto, but it's in real life too. Like in real life there's just times where it's just like, oh, okay, I know the story. It's like, oh, okay, this kid grew up an army brat, and like instantly things that go through your mind are like, okay, this kid probably moved a lot, was always the new kid in school, so you get like this sense of like, you already know chances are how the story is going to go.
I grew up in New York City. Oh, you didn't go camping much. Throwback.
Yeah, I mean, there's a point of that too, but like,
it's exactly right, and everything like that. And then it's just interesting to see that Eddie's still willing to talk to him after everything. That just kind of shows you again, Eddie's not necessarily.
But do you think he's talking to Roland? I feel like
I think that he's talking to talk.
Yeah, I feel like he's almost talking to himself.
You could have shuffled Roland out with 18 different characters that we've met already in this series, and Eddie would have told him the story.
Yeah, because this is his decompression. It's kind of what happens in real life when someone dies. A lot of times, if you've lost someone that's close to you, the period leading up to the funeral, as you're going through like prepping things and stuff like that for a funeral, that's kind of when you're going to kind of go through like things like coming to terms with like your relationship with the person, whatever it might be,
Yeah.
And I feel like that's kind of what Eddie's doing here. This is kind of like his run up to the funeral, maybe up through and including the funeral itself, is like that grieving process. This is kind of what he's doing.
This is almost Henry's eulogy.
Yeah, in a lot of ways.
In a lot of ways, this is what it is, because that's what that line says there. It's because Henry was dead, he was talking to bury Henry for good, and that's one thing that a lot of people don't realize is that it's something that's come up in shows before and everything like that. It's joked about and everything like that. A lot of people feel the need for human contact after a funeral. Whether it's friendship, whether it's sex with a loved one, with their wife and spouse and everything like that, it happens because they need to feel alive.
Yeah,
they need to remind themselves that they're still here, they're still moving on, and everything like that. And it's something that I haven't had much experience with death, like close family members and friends. I haven't lost a ton.
Yeah,
really close to me, and I'm wondering. I've always wondered like how I'm going to handle it, and I imagine it's going to be a lot like Eddie. I'm going to talk the shit out of some stuff when this happens,
Yeah.
I'm going to remember stories. I'm going to be talking. For the love of God, Ted, don't ever have me do a eulogy, because I swear to God, you'll be there all damn day. I will.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely.
If it's your eulogy, I'll just walk over and kick the first thing on dirt on them and just be like, thank God the devil's dead.
Dance on the grave.
Yeah. He's dead. The evil one is dead.
As like the thunderclouds just like come over.
Ah, shit. But right here is something interesting that I thought. The gunslinger listened and had said nothing. He was listening to Eddie just after what you were saying, just a little bit down. So the gist was simple. Eddie believed he had stolen his brother's life. Henry also believed this. Henry might have believed it on his own, or he might have believed it because he was so frequently heard their mother lecturing Eddie on how much both she and Henry had sacrificed for him. So Eddie could be safe as anyone could be in the jungle of a city, so he could be happy as anyone could be in this jungle of a city, so he wouldn't end up like his poor sister, and he didn't even hardly remember, but she had been so beautiful. God love her. She's with the angels, and that was undoubtedly a wonderful place to be, but she didn't want Eddie to be with the angels yet. just yet run over in the road by some crazy drunken driver like his sister, or cut up by some crazy junkie kid for the 25 cents in his pocket and left with his guts running all over the sidewalk. And because she didn't think Eddie wanted to be with the angels yet, he just better listen to what his big brother said and do what his big brother said to do. And always remember that Henry was making a love sacrifice. I think that kind of goes, that kind of gives you a bigger, deeper meaning into Eddie's character, is that he wasn't necessarily this way his whole life, but there was something that happened very young. His sister died, to where, okay, now we got to watch the young.
It changed the paradigm of his life, basically. Yeah.
And not just with him, but with his mother and with his brother as well. Because it's not, you need to listen to me, Eddie, the mom's talking. You need to listen to your big brother. You need to listen to Henry.
Yeah.
And everything. So it's an interesting shift to see. Maybe that's why Eddie questions. Maybe that's why Eddie doesn't have that sense of purpose and nobility, is because he's not allowed to have one. I mean, like, here we are 2 pages later, and we find out that, you know, he has to listen to his big brother and do everything that his big brother says. You're a big brother. How many times would you have steered your brother off a cliff?
I don't know. What do you mean exactly? I guess
how many times would you have pranked your brother or done something to him to where, you know, he wasn't necessarily in the right, you know, like oh yeah, dude, yeah, this candy's free. Go ahead and take a couple. You see, you laugh, but think about it. I mean, maybe that's why Eddie questions authority figures, because that's what, I mean, look at his relationship with Henry. I mean, we've already seen the kind of person that Henry was.
Yeah.
Eddie's already given us insight that, you know, Henry's a junkie worse off than Eddie was. Balazar, that's the reason Balazar picked Eddie instead of Henry.
Yeah.
And everything. But this is the guy that's supposed to take care of him. This is the guy that's supposed to raise him, basically, and stuff like that. You can kind of see why Eddie would question things.
Yeah.
And it's definitely something that I've never experienced, you know. I've never grown up with anything like that. I grew up with people who would, parents and aunts and uncles and adults that I trusted and everything. I couldn't imagine being raised by, you know, another kid.
Yeah.
Who would lead me wrong sometimes.
Yeah. That's true. That's true. All of this is another thing I find interesting is, like, kind of talking about the almost universality of some stories is like, do you find it crazy that Roland understands this from the word go without even hearing a lot of it? And he's from a different world.
Yeah.
So it's like, this exists in his world too. So this is like, in some ways, some of this stuff is so, like, quote unquote human condition that there's a universality to, like, to it. And I find that interesting for sure.
No, it's definitely an interesting thought that Roland just instantly understood this. Like, Eddie didn't need to say anything else. He could have let him just stop.
Yeah.
But he knew that Eddie needed it, and to, you know, bury his brother and everything like that.
You know, another one that I think that you know, all someone has to say is a couple words is whether it be a son or a daughter of a preacher. Like, instantly.
Oh yeah.
How much you know about that kid's childhood.
Yep.
You probably know almost everything about the kid's childhood. You know what I mean? Because it's like, there's just some of those things that are almost immovable. Like, it's just almost everyone I've talked to that's been a preacher's kid has had a very, very similar life.
Yeah.
And, you know, and like, same with like a preacher's wife. I thought there, you know, there were some things even in Castle Rock that alluded to that, where I was just like, oh yeah, like, I thought about how clever it was, because it's like, okay, cool, yeah, wife of a preacher, son of a preacher, like, you're communicating to the audience without having to go too deep into it, because we all kind of understand what it means, you know, like, in context of what a preacher.
There's a lot of them like that, you know, like son of a coal miner.
Yeah.
What do you think instantly when you think of a son of a coal miner? Someone
that's probably parent is not around much and dies young. I mean,
probably, yeah, exactly. He dies in an accident. He got sick early or something like that. Not exactly like, you know, like you said, not around, not supportive, you know, sometimes everything like that.
Yeah.
I go to like October Sky, that movie about, you know, like the coal mining in West Virginia and stuff like that, and it's just like, instantly go there with that thought when someone says, you know, son of a coal miner. And I'm with you on that, you know, daughter of a preacher. Yeah, okay, I know what structured life that person led.
Yeah.
It's a similar thing here with Eddie, is that, you know, oh, he lost an older sister and he was the baby, so the big brother had to raise him.
Yeah, yeah.
Had to watch out for him.
Yeah, exactly.
So.
Indeed. Okay. Do you have anything else? I have some, but it's a little ways down. Skipping a couple paragraphs. You got anything in the next few paragraphs?
The one here was where he was talking about the. Is it the cars where you're talking? Or past that?
No, but I'm past that. So if you got something there, go ahead.
It's where Eddie talks to Roland about the. So Eddie and Henry. I'm just going to summarize here because it's after that when Eddie's talking to Roland is what I have. Eddie and Henry stole a car, and they're cruising around, and they see a cop, and so Henry pulls over, ditches the car, and just instantly takes off running, and Eddie freezes.
Yeah,
deer in the headlights freezes. And then and
Henry's young too, like stealing a car. It's not like he's like
he was
16,
like 14
17.
or something, right?
He was younger. I think it was like somewhere in the 11 to 13 range, something like that. That's what I thought it was. Maybe they even clarify that, or it's just him? Because I feel like Eddie eventually tells him that he was just as scared as I was, and I feel like that almost implies that he's probably going to be in that like 11 to 13-year-old range, you know? Because like I feel like if a kid's like 15, 16, like he's not going to be as scared stealing a car, right?
Henry barely knew how to drive. He was 16 then.
Oh,
Eddie 8.
Oh, okay. So I guess I was totally missed that part and was just assuming.
Eddie was scared, crying. Henry scared too, and mad at Eddie, telling him to shut up and telling him to stop being such a fucking baby. So he had. So basically, they see a cop, and Henry just ditches the ride. He's gone, and this is what Eddie says about it. He was as scared as I was that day, Eddie told Roland as they sat and watched the last of the day dwindle from the water, where soon the only light would be that reflected from the stars. Scared her, really, because he thought the cop saw us, and I knew he didn't. That's why he ran, but he came back. That's the important part. He came back. Roland said nothing. You see that, don't you? Eddie was looking at Roland with harsh, questioning eyes. I see. He was always scared, but he always came back. Roland thought it would have been better for Eddie, maybe for both of them. Sorry about that. Maybe better for both of them in the long run if Henry had just kept showing his heels that day, or on one of the others. But people like Henry never did. People like Henry always came back because people like Henry know how to use trust. It was the only thing people like Henry did know how to use. First, they changed trust into need. Then they changed need into a drug. And once that was done, what was Eddie's word for it? Push. Yes, they pushed it. I think I'll turn in, the gunslinger said.
And I think that's a universality too. I feel like that's just one of those like users, not necessarily like drug users, but people users.
Yeah.
Like we've experienced some of them, through work or whatever it might be, social circles that, we've crossed into, or we've ran into people like that, and you just know them, to keep your guard up around them. They're always looking to use, they're always looking to abuse, like, whatever.
But the second we needed something, they were never there.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, I think everyone, I assume everyone has that experience. I know certainly we have.
If you haven't, you lucky bastards.
Yeah, exactly. Then you definitely lucked out, because it feels like there's always people like that.
Yeah.
And then we get to the next section here. We're no longer shuffling now. Now we're just getting like
That's true. I didn't even notice that.
Yeah, now we're just getting like some dots kind of separating sections, which I guess isn't even a new subsection, really.
Just a break for me, not even dots.
Oh,
so
really?
It's interesting.
Yeah, interesting. Okay, so then it goes on here. It says, what I have a note for, it says, Henry hadn't played sports in high school because Henry couldn't stay after for practice. Henry had to take care of Eddie. The fact that Henry was scrawny and uncoordinated and didn't care much for sports in the first place had nothing to do with it, of course. So I feel like that right there is an interesting one, because now you add the new layer to it, where it's like now every problem in Henry's life is Eddie's fault. And I feel like this isn't just Henry talking. I feel like this is Mom talking too. I mean, we've gotten some senses of that Mom's putting a lot of this out there, in terms of like things like, oh, your brother's doing everything for you, and like whatever.
Yeah.
So I feel like that kind of thing, like, hey, Henry's not doing sports because of you. I almost feel that with the relationship as it's been portrayed so far, that maybe he even got this more from his mom than he did from Henry. Because I feel like Henry may be a user, but like before drugs, I feel like they had a closer relationship.
Yeah.
So I feel like, some of this stuff is you're definitely hearing Mom talking through here, in my opinion.
Well, there's a point down here where it says, it's when they're having the fight when Eddie first catches him snorting heroin.
Yeah.
And he says, there was something in Nam that apparently rotted out your heart, Henry told him tearily. He just hoped that Eddie would remember all the years he had tried to be strong. For Eddie. For Mom. So it's not just for Eddie, you know, it's for Mom as well. That goes along with what you're talking about there, is that, you know, a lot of this came from Eddie's mom and how she decided that things should be.
Yeah.
Is that, okay, well, the only way to protect Eddie is if he listens to his big brother.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
I want to jump back up a little bit. Roland said nothing, but heard the voice of Court in his mind. Fault always lies in the same place, my fine babbies. With him, weak enough to lay blame.
Yeah, it's a good one. I have that highlighted as well.
Yeah.
I actually I'll jump a little bit further back because I found this interesting too.
Oh, yeah.
Is Henry got drafted and went to Vietnam where Henry got most of his knee blown off and the pain was bad and the drugs they gave him for it had a heavy morphine base. And when he was better, they weaned him from the drug. Only they didn't do such a good job because when Henry got back to New York, there was still a monkey on his back. So I feel like, if nothing else, it at least shows that, like, this isn't just Henry became a druggie because, you know, he was
bored
running with the wrong crowd or whatever. Like, you know, now you're talking this is a veteran-based thing. You know, a lot of people end up with morphine addictions. Back in those days, today it would be opiates, you know, based on things like, you know, oh, you got hurt at work, you got opiates, you know, prescribed to you, or on a battle zone, and then you get addicted. And, like, you know, like the huge epidemic we have in our country right now is opioids, and then like that eventually would translate into I think heroin, right? Because heroin is the same thing as like opiates. Like, so you get like right now in the country, you're seeing a lot of people that are like middle-aged white women that are like getting busted for like heroin because, like, you know, they got opiates and got addicted to them, and then their doctor cut them off, so they went looking for a replacement.
The next best thing.
Yeah, so now it's just whereas, like, you know, I'm not necessarily saying you have to generalize of like who you would generally expect to use heroin, but at the same time, like when it's like, you know, this 50-year-old soccer mom, I don't think that's your general idea of when you think like heroin. Someone that's on the street trying to buy heroin. So, you know, like, I find it interesting that if nothing else, it almost gives like some break to Henry that he didn't just become an addict because he's just a shitheel. Like, he, you know, kind of got addicted in the war and wasn't strong enough to, and that's not even a bad way to put it, but he wasn't able to they didn't wean him off very well, and so he kind of had an addiction coming out of the war, which is very common in especially the Vietnam era. Yeah. Our era as well. But yeah, that's, if nothing else, give some credit to Henry there. I think it's interesting and a good layering for King to add to it here. And then, yeah, a little bit below where you said, for Eddie and for Mom. So Henry tried to leave, and Eddie, of course, didn't let him. Eddie was consumed with guilt. Eddie had seen the scared horror that had once been an unmarked leg, a knee that was now more of Teflon than bone. They had a screaming match in the hall. Henry standing there in an old pair of khakis, with his packed duffel bag in one hand and a purple rings under his eyes. Eddie wearing nothing but a pair of yellow jockey shorts. Henry saying, "You don't need me around, Eddie. I'm poison to you, and I know it. Or to you, and I know it." And Eddie yelling back, "You ain't going nowhere. Get your ass back inside." And that's how it went until Mrs. McGursky came out of her place and yelled, "Go or stay. It's nothing to me. But you better decide one way or the other pretty quick, or I'm calling the police." And I find that interesting because a little bit ago we were just hearing Roland say it would have been better if Henry had just walked out of his life earlier. So now, as we're getting closer to the addiction, you know, it's one of these things now where, like, the guilt trip that Eddie's been on his whole life about his brother and whatever, you know, like, honestly, it isn't that much of a step to go, like, okay, well, he couldn't get into athletics or do well in school because of Eddie, not because he was a fucking idiot. So then, you know, he went to Vietnam now because of Eddie. He got wounded because of Eddie. He came back a junkie because, you know what I mean? Like, where it trails in Eddie's mind, like, so why he's holding him here now is because now he feels responsible for everything, which is an unfair thing for Eddie to take on.
Yeah, because Eddie says earlier in the book, he says he's taking care of Henry.
Yeah.
You know, the paradigm switched somewhere. It's probably
after Vietnam.
Yeah, after Vietnam. Eddie all of a sudden becomes the one that has to take care of Henry. Yeah. You know, I got to take care of my brother and everything like that. That's why he freaks out so bad. Yeah. When he realizes that Andolini means that he has Henry and everything like that. And, you know, and he's got my brother. And Roland's like, yeah, you know, I understand. I understand what the word means and everything like that. And, you know, and it's interesting to see that, you know, there's that paradigm shift there from Eddie has to be taken care of by Henry. Now Henry has to be taken care of by Eddie.
Yeah. And it's like almost feels owed. In a way, even though realistically,
Eddie paying back his debt.
Yeah, but realistically, it's unfair for Eddie to be put in that situation. And in some ways, maybe Henry's right to try to walk away at this point because ultimately, I don't know. Like, he knows that he's bad. He knows fully that he's going to drag Eddie down into it. So it's like maybe in a way there's your nobility, right? That Roland asked about.
Yeah.
Like the owing, owing your brother, like
Paying back his debt.
Whether it's right that you take on all that guilt of like, he didn't make it in sports because of me. He didn't do well in athletics or in whatever because of me. He, I guess he could have gotten to NYU, but they couldn't afford it. Maybe
his bad grades and everything like that kept him from getting a scholarship.
So like all this, taking all that shit on himself isn't necessarily the right thing. But at the same time, you do see some nobility there. All the way up through now you circle a little bit, draw a circle and go back to the beginning of this where we've been dealing with Eddie and his relationship, like you said, with protecting Henry, his older brother. And now we're kind of seeing it all pieced together and see where that dime flipped. And maybe in a way, whether, and I think that like, so maybe in a way Roland slapped Eddie was a little unfair, but at the same time, like, I don't know. Maybe it's the wrong nobility to have.
I think that's exactly where Roland was going with that. Is like he knew already where Eddie was and what Eddie was doing, and where his nobility and his purpose lied. And he that's why he pointed that out to Eddie. Is that where's your purpose again? What have you been doing with your life? Kind of is how I think of it.
Yeah.
And this is it right here. They're standing in the hallway yelling at each other about should Henry go or should he stay? And I don't know about you, but I've always had the mindset that, man, if someone's going to be like that in my life, no, you're not going to be around much longer. That's just not something that I'm going to be a part of and everything like that.
Yeah.
Because I know what it leads to and everything.
Yeah.
I want to help. I do, if you want to help yourself.
Yeah, that's the big difference when it comes to addiction. I've dealt with it in my life on multiple levels.
Yeah.
I've seen family members close and a little bit more distance deal with addiction. And what it comes down to is if the person is not willing to help themselves, then
you can't force it.
You can't force it. You can't, like, no matter what. And also, you're only opening yourself up to being used.
Yep.
And so it is one of those things that, yeah, I can speak from experience, and I'm not necessarily saying that you should give up on it, but if nothing else, if you're going to help them, you need to make sure your guard is up.
Exactly.
Constantly. So, like, I don't know. Yeah, there is definitely that element of like, you can only like be there for the person to a point, because you ultimately until they kind of hit that rock bottom and realize they need to change, it's never going to change anything. So
yeah, exactly. And that's the thing, is that Eddie doesn't let Henry get there. He decides to buddy up with him, and we see that right here is that they laugh at the lady because she says that Eddie's not decent, and they end up laughing. And then 2 weeks later, Eddie was snorting the stuff too, and he couldn't understand why the hell he had made such a big deal out of it. After all, it was only snorting. Shit, it got you off. And as Eddie, who Eddie would eventually come to think of as the great sage and eminent junkie, said, in a world that was clearly going to hell head first, what was so low about getting high?
Yeah.
Exactly like what we were talking about, is that, if you don't let the person hit rock bottom and you build crutches and little
or comforts.
Some
people end up like going so far out of their way that they make the person comfortable in their addiction. I've seen that personally too. So it's like all you're doing there is enabling them at that point.
And see, the problem is that you can't really blame Eddie. It's not like those, like what we're talking about with like comforts or not having his guard up or anything like that. Eddie honestly feels this is his job. This is what he owes Henry.
Yeah, it's a debt.
Yeah, it's a debt that he has to pay to him in order to get that, off his life, off of his back and everything.
Yeah.
So, when you look at, like the tarot card that we heard about, the prisoner, he has a monkey on his back, and the monkey's name is heroin. It could very easily be a monkey on his back, and that monkey's name is Henry.
Yeah, which turned into heroin, but ultimately it's always Henry, and maybe the prison is Henry as well. Like the monkey on the back may be heroin, but what if the prison itself is Henry in a way?
Yeah, exactly.
It's an interpretation for sure. I think that the easy way with the tarot card is to be like, he's a prisoner of heroin, he's a prisoner of his addiction, and the monkey on his back. But some of that, in the case of this character, is certainly going to be his brother. Let's see, a little bit further down, I have, it was Eddie who didn't know the story, and Eddie who, so this is a little bit down as they're, as it drones on, it says, Roland knew the story and said nothing. It was Eddie who didn't know the story, and Eddie who was clear-headed for the first time in maybe 10 years or more. Eddie wasn't telling the story to Roland, Eddie was finally telling the story to himself. So it's a kind of like a realization for him kind of thing, like in a way, like in his mind maybe he's telling the story to Roland, but in my mind, like when I've always pictured this scene, I pictured it like one of those where Roland is like maybe like kind of disinterested, but like, and I almost picture them like at the campfire or whatever, and like Roland's just somewhat disinterested, feigning interest a little bit here and there.
Mm-hmm.
But overall, Eddie's not even paying attention. He's more just like, I picture him like looking down into the fire, talking, and like, maybe even emoting almost in a way of like talking to himself. We've seen that in movies and stuff, right? Where people are more talking to themselves, even though like
there's a group or someone that they're talking to.
Ultimately, and I've always pictured it that way in my head. I don't know about you, but that's the way I've always pictured it. Is like, it's Roland is probably catching a little bit here and there, but it ultimately is not the story. It's not for him. It's for Eddie, and because that Eddie's just kind of, I don't know, going on and on in a way though to himself. It's a cathartic thing more than anything.
Yeah.
So what do you got next?
Eddie said he was haunted by Henry's knee, the twisted scar tissue up and down his leg. Of course, that was all healed now. Henry barely even limped, except when he and Eddie were quarreling. Then the limp always seemed to get worse. He was haunted by all the things Henry had given up for him, and haunted by something much more pragmatic. Henry wouldn't last out on the streets. He wouldn't be like a rabbit let loose in a jungle filled with tigers. On his own, Henry would wind up in jail or Bellevue before a week was out. So it's like Eddie understands where Henry's going. He understands that he's going to hit rock bottom.
Yeah.
And he can't let him do it because that's what he owes him.
I feel like there's when it says like he wouldn't he would be like a rabbit let loose on the jungle-filled streets. On his own, Henry would wind up in jail or in Bellevue within a week. I feel like what that speaks to is I feel like we've kind of I think it's been implied, especially with some of the Balazar stuff with picking him. I feel like Henry is certainly not as intelligent as Eddie.
Yeah.
So I feel like, some of this comes from the fact of like Henry is just not good he's not smart enough and clever enough to be like an active junkie. He's going to be one of those ones that overdoses fairly quickly or ends up, going for a 10-year, 15-year stretch.
Well, and he says that.
Whereas like Eddie is like one that's like, he's more clever. He's got an underlying intelligence that, that Henry doesn't have. So I feel like there's part of that.
Well, I think Andolini is the one that badmouths Henry to Eddie and says that your brother's, one bad day away from a pickup and jail time. I think it was Andolini that said that.
Yeah.
But yeah, basically it's that point that's like what you're saying. That's why Balazar picked Eddie.
Yeah.
So
it's one of those things that Henry's not going to work out on his own. He'll end up dead fairly quickly.
Yeah, exactly.
Or busted. I guess that's the other thing. It'd almost be the better way in this case, because the chances are with him it's probably death or prison. So then a little bit further down it says another man, a less pragmatic and more introspective than Roland, might have asked, and then in parentheses, to himself, if not right out loud, why this one? Why this man to start? Why a man who seems to promise weakness or strangeness or outright doom? So that's kind of an interesting I think that like it says, like it does say, more introspective than Roland might have asked, because it's not even necessarily something that Roland's asking. It's like one of those, like, if Roland were someone else that maybe was a little bit more high-minded.
Well, I mean, just read the next paragraph. It says, not only did the gunslinger never ask the question, it never even formulated itself in his mind.
Yeah.
So like he didn't even have this thought. Like this thought never even crossed his mind, and then it goes on.
But does it come to you though? Just out of curiosity, when you read it the first time, like or were you so caught up in the story, or did you ever get a spot where you're just like, wait, this is who he's drawing?
I kind of instantly thought that it was going to be a redemption tale there. You pull a junkie, he's already getting sober. I kind of thought that that's where it was going to go. So that's not, again, who I am.
Okay.
Kind of thing. I thought it was that redemption tale, that, like you talked about with Han a little bit earlier with Star Wars. I thought that's what it was going to be, is someone who was able to right a wrong that he made earlier in life and everything like that. That's where I thought it was going. So
yeah, because see, I did. There was part of me that was just like, really, like, because like there's part of me that's like, okay, drawing like this quest, like, so this is the moment of like the Lord of the Rings moment or whatever, where you kind of build your fellowship or whatever, right? And so like there's part of me that was just like, really, a freaking like junkie, like, and then as we get into some of the stuff, which I don't know if we'll get into in this episode now, but as we get on in this next little bit, it's one of these where it's like, it makes me question even more. It's like, really, this is who we're freaking stuck with? Are you kidding me?
Yeah.
And I think that's where like, maybe like, I've never been like, a hater on Eddie, but I've never been as much of an Eddie fan as you, and that I think part of it may come down to like some of this stuff where it's just like, yeah, it's like I'm expecting maybe some like maybe a ragtag group, but not necessarily this ragtag, I guess. But
yeah, exactly.
Go on with that next section there.
Then he says Cuthbert would have asked. Cuthbert had questioned everything, had been poisoned with question. He had died with one in his mouth. Now they were gone, all gone. Court's last gunslingers, the 13 survivors of a beginning class that had numbered 56, were all dead but Roland. He was the last gunslinger going steady on in a world that had grown stale and sterile and empty. 13, he remembered Court saying on the day before the presentation ceremonies, "This is an evil number." And on the following day, for the first time in 30 years, Court had not been present at ceremonies. His final crop of pupils had gone to his cottage to first kneel at his feet, presenting defenseless necks, then rise and receive his congratulatory kiss, and to allow him to load their guns for the first time. 9 weeks later, Court was dead. Of poison, some said. 2 years after his death, the final bloody civil war had begun. The Red Slaughter had reached the last bastion of civilization, light and sanity, and taken away all of them had assumed was so strong with the casual ease of a wave taking a child's castle of sand. And so he was the last, and perhaps he had survived because the dark romance in his nature was overset by his practicality and simplicity. He understood the only three things mattered: morality, Ka, and the Tower. Those were enough things to think about.
The only correction is there is it's mortality.
Oh, mortality.
Is
that what I said?
Yeah. No, you said morality, which is
it's mortality. Yeah, I read that wrong.
Yeah, so mortality, Ka, and the Tower, which is just an interesting thing to boil down. Again, the lead character of this story too is those things. It's interesting, and again, it goes back to like exploring a little bit more of who Roland is. You know, they could compare him to Cuthbert, a fallen comrade of his from yesteryear. That's the kind of guy that would have asked the question of like why this junkie, but you know, Roland just doesn't. He's not that kind of guy. He's.
And I think it's so interesting that we're right here in the middle of finding out everything we can about Eddie, and then boom, we get a paragraph like 2 paragraphs like that about Roland, and we find out more about
civilization.
Yeah, we find out more about Roland in those 2 paragraphs than we have in the previous 100 pages.
Yeah, and maybe even into the last book. Like in a lot of ways, that's some of the best insight we've had. There's been some allusions in the first book to like the fall of Gilead, right? Like I feel like there'd be things like Court, and but Court's gone now, along with the civilization that Roland was born into. Like, not necessarily that's an actual line, but like shit like that's the kind of stuff that we've been
simple lines.
That's the kind of stuff that we've been seeing through most of this. So now, over the last couple paragraphs, that's been like when you're talking universe building or world building, right there is some of the biggest world building we've had in a while.
Yeah, exactly.
When it comes to this world, it's a civil war. The slaughter reached the last bastion of civilization. There's just so much there, and then like I just love just that encapsulation of him there at the end of that whole thing of Roland, because it kind of ties back to like the first part of that of just how I don't want to say simple, but Roland's a very specific kind of person, and some things are not going to come to him like other things. So yeah, and he comes out of those mortality, Ka, and the Tower. So death that's eventually going to come, Ka, which he's talked a little bit about, and then the Tower. Like that's it for this guy, and that somewhat we've seen that when it comes to like things like Jake in the last book and stuff. Like those things apply as good to Roland of what we've seen up to this point as it does now. So it's just kind of cool to have these foundational things, and after having that huge like information dump from Eddie, now I feel like we have a really good understanding of these 2 characters.
Yeah.
So I feel like this is kind of in the middle of everything, but I feel like this is a good place to stop. Time-wise, we're about where we would normally be, and I feel like there's kind of a shift here over the next little bit. It's kind of a slow shift because it kind of fades, so there's a little bit more that might count into this, but it so quickly moves into like the next section that's way too big for the time we got.
I was actually going to suggest that we stop right here because there's not a big cliffhanger, but there's a big moment coming with where Eddie asks Roland what he thinks about everything he just told him. And I think that you're absolutely right. It definitely is like a boulder. Eddie just pushed the boulder to the top of the hill. And when he asked Roland what he thinks, he pushed the boulder off.
Yeah.
And it starts things rolling, and it just rolls so smoothly into the next. And I'm glad that you're asking us to stop here, because this is a perfect spot.
Worked out timing wise. I didn't know how far we would get. I figured we wouldn't go as far as I had read, but it definitely, I feel like it'd be a disservice to going any further, because with what we got left there's some pretty heavy stuff through the rest of this.
Yeah.
And I think it'd be better to be able to unpack it a little bit more than we will here at the tail end, because we always get a little bit more punchy here at the end of these.
Exactly.
So, let's go ahead and let me pull up the closing notes here. And we'll hit those real quick, and then we will sign out as we go towards another roundtable here in the future. So first of all, if you want to check out our show notes, which there isn't any for this episode, check it out at darktowerpalaver.com, as well as if you can be so kind as to subscribe, rate, and review our show on any of the services out there, things like Stitcher or any of your podcast services, especially with iTunes, though. If you're using iTunes, we would definitely appreciate that. iTunes is definitely the biggest thing when it comes to podcasting. Any reviews there do help us get more exposure and to grow our content and maybe see a larger crowd joining our content and being part of this whole group. So we would appreciate that. And also, if you want to interact with us, these ones are always a little bit less interactive than like roundtables, but we're definitely always open to people interacting with us on these shows. But if you do want to be part of one of these shows or a roundtable, there's a number of ways to do that, and Peter can tell you about those.
Best way is to email us. It's darktowerpalaver@gmail.com. And like Tad said, if you ever want to email about a book club episode where you want to talk about something that we talked about, give insight, or correct our pronunciation of the word travois, I mean, always feel free to email us. We don't mind. We love all emails equally. And so you can do that. You can also reach out to us through Facebook. It's facebook.com/darktowerpalaver. You can touch base with us there. Or you can tweet at us. It's at darktowerpod. That's at darktowerpod. And then we stream our shows live on YouTube. It's youtube.com/darktowerpalaver. So subscribe, ring that bell so you get notifications when we're going live. Book clubs don't stay up, but roundtables do. Book clubs just because of that copyright issue like we talked about. But yeah, you can check out all our old shows that we have on there on YouTube. And then, email us.
Yeah, and with the YouTube, if you guys know when we're going live, you guys can always join with us live in the chat. And
like Cody and Magnus did today.
Yeah, indeed. And they weren't as talkative this time, but you can always do that. If you want to, be part of like the next conversation that we're about to have with this book, you could always, join us with the next one in the round table or the book club and join us live and interact with us. Even though that won't go and be posted in that sense, you will definitely be on the podcast and everything like that. You just won't be able to go back and watch it on YouTube. Whereas like the round tables, you can always go back and watch those episodes, and it'll actually have the chat go along the side, so you can kind of see what was going on real time, see all the stuff that I'm showing Peter on screen, and that kind of stuff for roundtables. Yep. So this one definitely got a little bit deeper than I expected.
Yeah,
I don't know why. I mean, I guess you're getting into like things like human nature.
You're getting into the big
some of bigger
reveals.
Things in life.
Well, the big reveal with Eddie's character and stuff like that. These aren't small reveals and stuff like that. This is This is a
Stephen King character.
Yeah.
Stephen King characters, generally speaking, are not two-dimensional. But also, I mean, just in terms of things like addiction and users and people that use other people and like just, I don't know, it got a little bit more heavy than I would expect necessarily. But it is a heavier portion as we talk to these characters and their natures and stuff. So kind of interesting for sure. It's always something. I don't know. It's funny prepping these shows.
It's different every book club.
It's funny because like even after prepping the show and like getting all the notes and stuff and kind of knowing what I wanted to talk about and only assuming what you wanted to talk about, I guess I wouldn't have guessed that we would have gotten into as much of that as we did. Yeah. But I'm always glad the way that it goes though. So yeah, we will go ahead and see you guys next time. In a couple of weeks, we'll be back for a roundtable. And we like our general thing is 2 roundtables and then a book club, 2 roundtables and a book club. That's kind of our patterning. Yep. So we will see you guys next time for a roundtable. And until then, as we always say, long days and pleasant nights.
Long days and pleasant nights, folks.
And I'm not sure if Cody is still in the chat or not, but thank you for joining us. I know Magnus already had to take off.
I dropped out, so if it says someone's in there, it's probably Cody.
Okay, so yeah, Cody's still in there. Yeah, that's why I was curious. It did say one, so you dropped out. So Cody, thanks for joining us. Looks like you're having some tractor issues. Just be glad that tractors don't have computers in them. Otherwise, they could be playing the mono. Or unless they do have computers, then you got to be careful.
Yeah.
He says, I was a Boy Scout. I've made a Travoy. Yeah, I mean, Peter was a scout as well.
I was a Boy. I'm always a Boy Scout. No, yeah, I was a Boy Scout. I made a
But see,
Travoy.
is there different things to call those though? I feel like there's different.
We always just called it a stretcher.
A stretcher, a gurney. Like I feel like I don't know. Like, yeah, I don't know. I was never really a scout. It wasn't my scene really. So, but yeah, thanks for joining us. Truck. He said. I thought he said tractor earlier. I guess
No, he said truck.
Oh, I guess I glanced and said farm truck. I thought it said maybe tractor. Okay, I was glancing. Sometimes I don't look
Like
as
you
close
said,
to the chat.
We get punchy.
Well, that was early when I read that, and that was earlier in the episode. No, yeah, I was just my eyes are always bouncing around. So, well, with the truck anyway, same thing. That's even safer though. Chances are, if it's a truck, as long as it's not too new, there's no computer in it, no North Central Positronics nonsense.
Right.
Can't trust them, man. They'll kill us all.
Thought you liked North Central Positronics.
Yeah, it's Skynet that I'm worried about.
Ah.
All right, Cody, thanks for joining us.
See you, Cody.
And Magnus, I guess if I guess you wouldn't come back and listen to the live stream because you can't, so never mind. All right, see you guys. Bye.